We've been talking about the Bible. We've been talking about going through the whole New Testament and what a book it is. We've been mentioning different things. Last week we were in Hebrews, and this week we're in the book of James. So if you want to turn to the book of James, this is all about what wisdom. And you see the 5 points in your outline. If you have it, if you don't, you can get one in the back there. We have 5 points. And this book, many believe, was written by the half-brother of Jesus. He doesn't mention that in the first part of it. He just talks about the fact he's a servant. It's interesting how he didn't believe when Jesus was alive, and then when Jesus resurrected, everything changed. I mean, the whole thing. All of a sudden, now he's a believer. He becomes an elder in the Lord's church. He is one in Acts chapter 15 that talks about those that are Gentiles, what they should follow from the Old Testament. He talks about, and it says really it should be, strangled meat. Stay away from anything strangled, anything that's been sacrificed to idols. Stay away from blood and stay away from sexual morality. He says that's what we need to hold them to. And everyone was in agreement that that's exactly right. You don't follow all the old law. That's why we have the new law, the new covenant. And so here, James, as many believe that he writes this book, he talks about to the 12 in the dispersion, those that are scattered, those Christians that are scattered. And he talks about wisdom. This whole book, some people call this the New Testament Proverbs. And so as we look here, there's wisdom in point number 1, suffering. And I know that a lot of times that's the last thing we want to do is suffer. Man, I like it when it's good. I like the good times. I like it when there's peace, there's tranquility, there's relax. I just love all that. The suffering, I just really don't enjoy that. It's kind of like working out. When you work out, all of a sudden, man, you know it's coming. You're going to be sore. That lactic acid's getting in the muscles. You're going to be sore, and then you go through it. I knew a guy that he would work out, instead of just working out it consistently to where he wouldn't have that soreness, he'd work out maybe once every 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, man, he'd really be feeling it for about 3 or 4 days. He'd get over that, and for about a week and a half, he'd feel good, and then he'd have another workout. Yeah, I hadn't worked out in a while. I figured I'd do it. I said, you're going to be sore. You're going to be hurting. He said, yeah, I don't know. But for us, there is wisdom in suffering. It says in chapter 1, verse 2, it says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. We've talked about temptation and trials, temptations within, trials without. Various kinds, when you have these trials, when you meet these trials. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Man, the struggle is how you get it. We all want the end product. We like that where it talks about perfect, complete, not lacking anything. But that's the process to get to this end result. But we don't like the process. We like the product of it. And you can't have one without the other. And there's wisdom in suffering going through this. Now it talks about when you're going through this, now you're equipped. And now you can help others that are going through the same things that you've been through. And, you see, it's been mentioned before, when you see an egg and you see that little chick just pecking out of that egg, if you go ahead and help it as it's struggling, you go ahead and help it, its beak will never get hard enough to be able to eat on its own. And so it'll eventually die. But you wanted to help it. You wanted to make it easy. And for us, it's the same way in life. When we make things easy, it doesn't really help us. You see a young person that has had everything given to them. They're not resilient. So then later on in life, when trials come, because it says when you meet, not if you meet, when you meet trials of various kinds, it's going to be difficult because they don't have any resilience built in them. And so it's going to be very tough. It's just like an adult in the same situation. I can tell, you can see all the different trials that you've been through. Whether that be loss of life, whether it be financially, whether that be relationships. You look at all those different things. Health, all those different things that are taking place. All those have built you to where you are now. They've all got this layer built upon. It's just like if you have a callus. You're going through and you're doing something, you get these calluses on your hands. That's because you've been working through something. You've been struggling. You've had some blisters. You've gotten some things, and it's hardened you up. Now you can go in and you can grab and touch and whatever, and it doesn't hurt. It's the same in life. We have to build those calluses. We have to go through the struggle. There's wisdom of struggling. And it talks about this wisdom. And so we need to not just shy away from it. We need to lean into it. We need to realize when we're struggling, man, this is the good times, because this is going to help me. So it's going to allow me to look back, and I should have been joyful the whole time. Well, it's hard to. It's easy for someone to say, yeah, you should be joyful. You're going through tough times. No, I don't want to hear that either. But knowing that, what it's going to develop, I just need to be waiting patiently, thinking, man, okay, it's coming. And so the wisdom of suffering, there's perfection. There's perfection, not just perfection, but patience involved. Point number 2, the wisdom of service. Now, I know a lot of people that love to be served, but it's talking about the wisdom of actually serving someone else. The wisdom of service. And if you look in chapter 2, chapter 2. I'll get there eventually. Chapter 2, verse 17. It says that, so also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. If you go up and look in chapter 2, verses 8, it says, if you really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law of transgressors. Now, just looking at that piece right there, and we'll get into verse 17, but just looking at that right there, it talks about transgressors. That means someone going beyond. Transgressing is going beyond. And so here it says, but if you show partiality, that showing partiality, that's action involved. It takes action for you to be nice. It takes action for you likewise to show partiality, to show one person favoritism over another. And it says if you do that, if you look at someone and you judge them and you think you're lesser than, then it says that you're the sinner. You're the one that's missed the mark. You're the one that's gone beyond what it was intended. And because he talks about the royal law is that you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. If you do this, you're doing well, it talks about. And so service, the wisdom of service, talks about showing our love, showing your love to other people. And it's easy to look at someone and say, oh yeah, I mean, a person, they look nice, they're groomed, they smell good, as Jimmy was talking about the other Jimmy, and if someone's just listening to this lesson, they weren't here for the song part and they just listen to the recording, they'll wonder what's going on. And they can always ask. But looking at this, I mean, there's some people you gravitate towards because you're just attracted. Well, they look good, they look pleasant, and so I am willing to talk and be friends with that person. But then there's that other person. They don't look so good. Maybe the smell is a little different. Their clothing's a little odd or whatever. Maybe their behavior is different. It says we're not supposed to show any difference. We're supposed to treat each other the same. And so I look at this group right here. Man, we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences, different cultural experiences when you talk about holidays, when you talk about family get-togethers. Everybody does something different. Everybody has their own little customs. And I know if you spent time around me, you'd say, oh yeah, he's saying all that, so we'll treat him good because he's the different one. Now, you're not supposed to laugh at that, guys. So when you think about that, it's the wisdom of service, showing your love to others, which means you have to get your hands dirty. This is something that you can't be comfortable all the time. You've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to get involved. You've got to be engaged. And in verse 17, it talks about, and so also faith by itself is not have works is dead. Well, then in verse 22, it says, you see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. In other words, it takes action there too. Love takes action, faith takes action. And so it's showing your love and showing your labor. That's the wisdom of service. it's interesting when you look at a teacher. My mom was talking about this last week, and it's happened to me as well, where a teacher, the state, whatever state you're in, I know we're in Texas now, but whatever state you're a teacher in, they will have a teacher fill out these demographics. And so as a teacher, you go in, you fill these demographics out, and they're wanting to know who's of this race, who's of this male, this gender, all that kind of stuff. So they want you to fill all this stuff out. They want to get all the demographics, and they feel like on a teacher level, it's easier. They give that to the office. The office compiles it and then gives it to the district. And so you have an idea, and they give it to the state, and it goes all through. And so you have demographics for the school, demographics for the district, and the state level. And so I remember talking to my mom, and she's like, man, I don't know how many kids I have that are this or this, because she just looked at them as her kids. And that's what you do. With here, I don't look at somebody looking different. I just look at, man, this is family. This is what it's supposed to be. We all bring something different to the table that makes the table. And so that's the way it should be in the community. We should be involved in the community, trying to help them learn more about Jesus. It's showing your love and showing your labor. In other words, it's practicing. There is wisdom of service because you're putting things into practice. Point number three is speech. Now, this is a tough one. I remember there was a young man that had a foul mouth. He was constantly cussing on a regular basis. And I didn't know how in the world he could do that. He would cuss at somebody, and then he'd be in worship, and he'd be singing the songs and spouting off, participating in class. And I just look at him like, I just heard you talking to somebody in a way you shouldn't talk to him. And he couldn't see the difference. That, I was cussing with that guy. But that's not what it talks about here. It says in verse 2, for we all stumble in many ways. And that's kind of encouraging to know that it's not just me. We all stumble in many ways, but if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. In other words, if he can keep his speech under control, man, he's got a lot of strength. That is power right there. In verse 9, it says, with it, talking about our tongues, with it, we bless the Lord, our Lord and Father. That's what that young man was doing. And with it, we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. That's what he was doing. And when I brought this verse to him, and we got alone, and I was in my office area, and I just said, hey, I don't understand this. I think there's a disconnect. You're cursing, saying all kinds of stuff. You've got a foul mouth out there. But then when you come to worship, man, you're acting as though you're completely holy, and there's a disconnect. And he's like, he just staring at me blank like he doesn't understand. So I read this verse. He's like, so I'm not supposed to be cussing? No, you're not supposed to be cussing. You're cussing people that God's made in his likeness. And he said, I probably need to work on that. Yeah, you do. You do need to work on that, because that's the whole thing. If you can keep that, if you can just watch what you say, it goes a whole lot further. Sometimes I've heard people, last week I think we sang the song, We Praise Thee, O God. And we're singing that song, and we're singing it to him, the audience of one, right? We're singing, praise you, O God. But instead, sometimes in the world, we just say, oh God. So we use his name in vain, and we make his name a common name, thinking that that's no big deal. We use the Lord's name in vain. Doing that is to make it commonplace, to make it unimportant, and to not distinguish it among others. Sometimes there's two different types of people that we show other people. Sometimes there's two types of selves. One is we show our Christian family, and the one we show our physical family. And I imagine that might have been the case this morning. I don't know. I'm glad you're here. I will say that to start off, but I know that sometimes getting ready for worship is not a fun thing. And there's all kinds of tempers flaring and hurry and get ready. I'm coming. I told you I was coming. And if you wouldn't have spent so long, I'm tired of hearing that. You hear all kinds of words taking place. And then when you enter here, Oh, it's good to see you, brother. Good to see you, sister. And look around right now, everybody laughing, because those are the ones that probably had it this morning. So, sadly, we show two different selves. You know, sometimes the people, our physical family, they get the worst end of it. They get the true self. They see it all. And sometimes it's not very pretty. And that's what God's seeing. And we need to realize that sometimes it's best just to hold that tongue and not say anything. Sometimes we feel like our physical family, they're always going to be there. So I can say whatever I can say. I can beat them up with words because what are they going to do? They're still family. And we treat our friends differently because we may lose a friend. Well, we treat our spiritual family different too sometimes. Sometimes we can be ugly, sometimes we can be kind. If we could remember there's power, there's wisdom of speech, and use a correct speech, no matter where we're at, then you're talking about building a reputation and building the opportunity where people want to come talk to you before they talk to someone else. They want to get your advice because they know that they're not going to beat over a stick the first time they say something. Point number 4 is separation. There's wisdom of separation. And if you look in chapter 4, there's wisdom of separation. It says in verse 4, "You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity or hatred with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose that there is no purpose that the scripture says he yearns jealously over the Spirit that he has made to dwell in us?" And so there should be a separation. We shouldn't look like the world. Now, there's no doubt we have to be in the world to be able to reach the world, but we shouldn't be of the world. We shouldn't be doing what they do. I tell you, there was a guy, he was really struggling in his faith, and he was coming up with all kinds of excuses to do things. And so he would go to these places where women are scantily dressed, and I'll just say it that way, so if you have younger people, they don't have to wonder what I'm saying. Parents can explain it later if they want. They had these scantily dressed women, and I said, well, why would you go there? And he said, well, Jesus was friends with tax collectors and drunkards, and so I'm just going there. And I said, what are you doing there? I'm talking about Jesus. Well, he wasn't talking about Jesus, but he was acting as though he was. He was trying to be in the world. He was trying to really be of the world. And so Jesus was a friend of tax collectors and sinners, it talks about. But it doesn't mean that he joined in their sin and wasn't around them when they were doing those things. And so, knowing that, when you look at that, it says, you adulterous people. It's saying you're spiritually creating or committing adultery. So, spiritual adultery. So that means you're a cheater. If you're doing this, that means you're a cheater, and nobody likes a cheater. You think about a cheater in high school. Man, it wasn't, it's very easy. You know, last year, when I would talk to some of the kids back and forth, I'd say, hey, I thought you were walking with so-and-so, and you never really know with high school kids. They go back and forth and break up and all kinds of stuff. And so if I ever asked, then it'd be like we'd already broken up, and then all of a sudden the girl's upset, and I didn't realize I shouldn't have asked. You know, and so I would say, well, hey, are you walking by yourself? What's going on with that? Oh, well, he's a cheater. Well, and it doesn't take long in a small school. If you're a cheater, everybody knows about it. And so you lose your reputation. In life, you lose your family. You lose your reputation as well. But in eternity, you lose your salvation. And there's a big difference. And he's saying you can't be both. You can't be a friend of the world and a friend of God's. He's saying you got to choose. What's your choice going to be? Too often, we try to straddle the fence. We try to look at that fence and we think, well, if we can just kind of balance, on the fence, we're not doing bad or wrong. We're just kind of in the middle, just kind of gray area. Well, the whole aspect is that whole fence is owned by Satan. He wants to get you as close as he can to his side. And so I've seen too many people say, do I have to do this or do I have to do that? Not realizing, man, I should want to worship God as many times as I ought to. As many times I ought to, that ought to mean every time it's offered. I should be worshiping him. I should be thanking him. And then you talk about all the stuff that, the Bible says I shouldn't do this, I should do this. Well, do I have to? I've seen people try to shortcut the Bible. And when you shortcut the Bible, you're shortcutting your life eternally. Because that whole aspect of how close can I get before I get burnt? You don't do that. You don't live life that way. But sometimes we spiritually live like that. We say, man, how close can I get to it without really getting involved in it? I can be around all that, but I'm still keeping a distance. The whole aspect is, if I keep an arm's length distance from the world, and, I'm just an arm's length distance from the world, well, the world is moving further away from God. It's continuing to move further away, but if I'm still just an arm's length away, I'm still just an arm's length away. And as the world gets further away, I'm still just an arm's length away. And it keeps going, and eventually, I'm so far removed from Christ. I chose the world instead of Christ, even though I'm still just an arm's length away from the world. And too often we play like that, thinking that God really doesn't know. And that's why he says in verse 4 of chapter 4, you adulterous people, stop cheating on me. You can't be friends here and friends with me. You can't continue to do what you want to do and still be with me. And I think the reason why we do that, we try to get as close as we can. We try to get on that fence line, is because we like instant gratification. I mean, our whole life is full of instant gratification. And he's saying in verses 4 and 5, he's saying delayed gratification is the best. If you delay that gratification, I'm telling you, you'll be so excited you did, and heaven will be too. Because it's waiting for you, but you have to delay what you want right now to get what you want later. Remember, it's not the here and now we're here for. It's the hereafter that we're here for. Point number 5, soul winning. There's wisdom of soul winning. And so, while the wisdom of suffering gives us patience, the wisdom of service, we see practice. The wisdom of speech, we see power. The wisdom of separation, we see peace, because we're at peace with God. But the wisdom of soul winning. In verse 19 of chapter 5, it says, my brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. And so it says anyone among you wonders. So anyone among you wonders. So any of us. It's talking about keeping the saved saved. But it's also, don't be mistaken, that it's not about, not seeing those people that aren't saved and helping them be saved. Because it says brings them back. So it's talking about the saved, keeping the saved saved. In other words, keep encouraging people. This life is so difficult on your own anyway. And if we have people that can keep us focused, there's some people that I just need in my life to keep me in line. And you know those kind of people in your life. They're not going to let you get away with it. They're not going to let you just talk through it. You need those people. He says those people are huge because let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering, it says he'll save his soul and he'll cover a multitude of sins. In other words, he's right with God. She is right with God. And so that's what it's about. It's about being right with him. And make no mistake, there's no way this happens at all. It talks about someone wandering. There's no way it happens if you don't sit there and look around and you don't notice. Look at the people who may not be here on a regular basis, and encourage them. That doesn't happen unless we care for people. We've got to care more about them than our convenience and our comfort zone. And then the one thing is, it takes actions. We've got to pursue. We've got to go out with everything we've got. We've got to pursue them. Now, it's difficult. When you know someone's doing something wrong, it's difficult to have that conversation. To go and say, man, they know what I'm going to talk about, and they know it's going to be difficult. Well, let me just tell you, if you're going to have that difficult conversation, and you feel very awkward about pursuing someone and saying, hey, I'm worried about you, let me just tell you, they're more worried about you talking to them. They're more worried about, I'm not going to be comfortable if he or she comes and talks to me about it. They're the ones that don't feel comfortable because they know they're not living right. But you need to love them more than you love your comfort. And love them more to be able to help them, because this is all about all of us going to heaven and getting as many in this community as possible to go to heaven. It's about reaching the lost and keeping the saved saved. So there is wisdom. There's wisdom of suffering. There's wisdom of service. There's wisdom of speech. There's wisdom of separation. And there's wisdom of soul winning. There's wisdom all around in this book. And I hope you dive in it this week and really grasp onto some of those things. But the last on your outline, it says, what wisdom? So be wise. And how do you get wisdom? It's found in chapter 1, verse 5. It says pray about it. And it says not only that, but ask God, who gives generously without reproach, and it'll be given to him. And so we want wisdom. That's what we need to be asking. We need to be asking him while we continue to maintain getting and eating up God's word. And so if you need prayers, let us know what we can be doing. If you haven't put Christ on in baptism and not sure exactly the cost of what that's going to be, let's talk about the cost of being a disciple of Christ. What it means to be a Christian. That doesn't mean I have my sins forgiven, I get a new life, as it talks about in Romans chapter 6, verse 3 and 4, and then all of a sudden I'm done. Now all of a sudden the real work begins. I need to change my life beforehand. I need to change it now. I need to continue becoming more like him. Whatever we can do, please let us know, not just while we stand and sing, but at any time, 24/7. If you have someone you want me to study with, if you want me to study with you, let me know at any time. But whatever we can do, please come while we stand and sing.